paralyzed pregnant CEO's daughter was disowned by her cruel fiancé after her accident, only to be secretly rescued by a single-dad janitor who was actually a grieving billionaire in disguise. You are nothing to us now. A broken piece of a forgotten deal. The biting cold of the hospital corridor seemed to seep directly into Alara's bones, a relentless chill that no thin, threadbare blanket could ever hope to conquer. The sterile silence of the late hour was broken only by the soft, rhythmic squeak of her wheelchair and the distant, mournful beep of a machine down the hall, each sound echoing the profound emptiness that had hollowed out her world. She was alone. The words of Julian's father, Mr. Sterling, played on a cruel, unending loop in her mind, each syllable a fresh splinter of ice in her already shattered heart. Just 6 months ago, she was Alara Vance, daughter of a titan of industry, engaged to the heir of an equally powerful dynasty, her future a path paved with polished marble and golden light. Now she was just Alara. Her father's sudden death from a heart attack had been the first seismic tremor. The car accident that followed just weeks later had been the earthquake that brought everything crashing down, taking the use of her legs and leaving her in a world of constant, weary pain. It was in that sterile hospital room, with its flickering fluorescent lights, that Julian and his family had delivered the final, fatal blow. They saw her paralysis not as a tragedy to be endured together, but as a flaw in a product, a breach of contract. They disowned her, denied the child growing within her, and vanished from her life, leaving her with nothing but a trust fund that had been mysteriously emptied and a heart full of ash. The hospital bills piled up, each white envelope a testament to her desperation. She existed in a small, rented room nearby, the wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin, the air thick with the scent of damp and despair. Her pregnancy, once a source of tender joy, was now a terrifying, sacred responsibility she had no idea how to fulfill. Every day was a quiet, dignified battle for survival, her once bright eyes now holding a haunted, fragile look, though her resolve remained an unwavering, flickering flame in the darkness. She was a ghost in the machine of the city, a whisper of a life that once was, pushing herself through the world one painful, squeaking wheel turn at a time. Total silence. One evening, in the starkly lit hospital cafeteria that had become a sad refuge, she counted the few crumpled bills and coins on her tray. It was enough for a small bowl of watery soup and a piece of dry bread, a meager meal she would try to make last. As she navigated the narrow space between tables, a sharp clatter echoed through the room. She looked up and saw a man, a janitor in a faded gray uniform, standing frozen by a waste bin. His tray lay overturned on the floor, its contents a sad collage of spilled coffee and scattered food. But it wasn't the mess that made Alara's chest tighten. It was the look on the man's face. His features were gaunt, his eyes holding a hollow, unbearable grief that she recognized instantly. It was the same desolate emptiness she saw in her own reflection. He didn't seem angry, just splintered, defeated. He was a tall man with broad shoulders that spoke of a strength his expression now betrayed, and his hands, calloused and worn, clenched and unclenched at his sides. He looked like a man carrying the weight of an unspoken tragedy. A quiet sob seemed to catch in his throat. Everyone else in the cafeteria averted their eyes, pretending not to see, wrapped in their own cocoons of indifference. But Alara couldn't look away. She saw a fellow soul adrift in a sea of pain. A flicker of hesitation coursed through her. This was her food money for the next day, the last of it. The baby inside her gave a soft, gentle flutter, a tender reminder of her own desperate needs. Yet, the sight of the man's raw suffering was a current too strong to resist. Her own hardship had not hardened her heart. It had made it raw, impossibly soft, attuned to the quiet frequencies of sorrow. With a soft click of the brake on her wheelchair, she made her decision. She wheeled herself to the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed her last few dollars across the worn surface. "Could I get a large coffee, black?" she said, her voice a quiet murmur. "And a tray with the hot meal, please. The roast beef." She added a warm chocolate chip cookie, an extravagance that felt both reckless and necessary. It was a simple, selfless act, performed without any expectation of reward, a tiny rebellion of kindness against a cruel world. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. She slowly wheeled over to the janitor, who was now numbly retrieving a dustpan. The golden glow from the vending machine cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating the profound weariness etched into his face. He didn't seem to notice her approach until she was right beside him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle. He looked up, his eyes dazed, and for a second, she saw a flicker of something other than pain, surprise. She held out the warm tray. The scent of coffee and hot food wafted between them, a small pocket of comfort in the sterile air. "I think you dropped this," she offered with a small, sincere smile. He just stared, first at the tray, then at her face, then at her wheelchair. 1,000 unspoken questions seemed to hang in the heavy air between them. His gaze was intense, unwavering, as if he were seeing something he thought had vanished from the world forever. A moment of stunned silence stretched on. He finally reached out, his large, rough hand brushing against hers as he took the tray. The contact was brief, but a jolt of warmth passed between them, a strange and undeniable connection. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick and cracked. You didn't have to do that." Alara simply nodded, the effort of speaking past the lump in her throat feeling too great. "Everyone deserves a hot meal," she said softly. Without another word, she turned her wheelchair and navigated back toward the exit, the squeak of her wheels the only sound she made. She was gone. Liam Blackstone stood frozen in the middle of the hospital cafeteria, a plastic tray of hot food in his hands, feeling as heavy and significant as a bar of gold. The warmth seeped into his skin, a stark contrast to the biting cold that had been his constant companion for the past year, ever since his wife, Sarah, had taken her last breath in a room on the 4th floor of this very building. He, the reclusive CEO of Blackstone Enterprises, a man who moved markets with a single phone call, had been working here as a janitor for 3 months. It was a penance, a desperate, irrational attempt to feel close to her, to scrub away his own guilt in the place where his world had splintered. He had surrounded himself with the sterile silence of grief, becoming a ghost in his own life, his vast, stately mansion a cavernous tomb of memory. He had come to believe the world was a transactional, heartless place. And then this woman, this angel in a wheelchair, with haunted eyes that held a universe of her own pain, had performed an act of pure, selfless kindness. She had looked at him, a janitor, a nobody, and seen a human being in need. She had spent what was so clearly her last dollar on him, a complete stranger. It was a gesture so pure, so innocent, it felt like a miracle. A sharp gasp escaped his lips, a sound of awe. It was as if a light had been switched on in a room he'd thought would remain dark forever. A profound, seismic shift occurred deep within him. His grief did not vanish, but for the first time in a year, it was joined by something else. Awe, intrigue. A new, fragile sense of purpose began to unfurl in his chest. He had to find her. He had to know her story. He had to repay this sacred debt. His heart, which he thought had shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces, gave a slow, powerful thud. He was reawakened. The brief moment of connection faded as Alara wheeled herself out into the pounding rain, the city lights shimmering and blurring through the water on the cheap plastic poncho she wore. The consequence of her kindness was immediate and stark. The soup she'd foregone was not just a meal. It was her last meal before the small disability check was due to arrive. The next 2 days were a blur of gnawing hunger and brittle pride. She rationed the last of her crackers, sipping glasses of water to fool her stomach, her thoughts constantly on the tiny life depending on her. On the 3rd day, a white envelope was slipped under her door. It wasn't a bill. It was an eviction notice. Her landlady, a woman with a face like clenched stone, had sold the building. She had 2 weeks to leave. Despair, cold and heavy, settled over her like a shroud. The walls of her small, damp room seemed to close in, the air growing thick and suffocating. She clutched the worn, threadbare blanket to her chest, her body trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer terror of her situation. pregnant, paralyzed, and soon to be homeless, felt unbearable. She buried her face in the rough fabric, a single hot tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. It was a moment of absolute, crushing defeat. The quiet resolve that had carried her this far finally faltered, cracking under the relentless pressure. She felt completely and utterly alone. Utter darkness. The next morning, another envelope appeared. This one was thick, cream-colored, with no return address. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a cashier's check for $10,000 and a simple, typewritten note. The note had only 4 words. "For your kindness." A friend. Alara stared at the check, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a cruel prank. She held the crisp paper up to the flickering light of her small lamp, tracing the official bank markings, the undeniable watermark. It was real. A wave of disbelief and then overwhelming relief washed over her, so potent it left her breathless. A sob, this time not of despair but of cathartic release, escaped her lips. Who? The only person she could think of was the janitor, the man with the haunted eyes. But how could he have found her? How could a simple janitor afford such a sum? The questions swirled, but they were drowned out by the sheer, staggering reality of the money in her hand. It wasn't just money. It was a lifeline. It was safety. It was a roof over her head, food for her and her baby. It was hope, delivered anonymously and miraculously to her door. She didn't know that from a sleek, black car parked across the street. Liam Blackstone watched her window, his expression a mixture of profound relief and unwavering determination. This was only the beginning. He had hired a discreet private investigator the night of her kindness, and it had taken less than a day to uncover her tragic story. The disinheritance, the accident, the betrayal. The cruelty she had endured made his blood run cold. His anonymous gift was merely the first step. He would become her hidden savior, her guardian angel, ensuring she never felt that desperate, biting cold of fear again. He would not let her world shatter. Liam's secret intervention was swift and comprehensive. Through a newly created philanthropic foundation, he anonymously paid off the entirety of Alara's staggering hospital debt. The intimidating stack of white envelopes simply stopped arriving. Next, using a high-end real estate agent sworn to secrecy, he arranged for a new apartment. A letter arrived for Alara, explaining that a local housing charity for expecting mothers with disabilities had selected her for a fully subsidized, furnished apartment in a safe, quiet building. When she arrived, she gasped. The apartment was bathed in a soft, golden glow from large, clean windows. It wasn't ornate or extravagant, but it was warm, secure, and beautiful. The kitchen was stocked with healthy food. The living room had a comfortable sofa and a soft rug, and the bedroom had a sturdy crib already assembled in the corner, a small, handmade baby rattle resting on the crisp, new mattress. Every detail was designed for her comfort and safety, from the wheelchair-accessible shower to the lowered countertops. Tears glistened in Alara's eyes as she ran a hand over the smooth, polished wood of the crib. Felt like a dream, a fairy tale she didn't deserve. Each anonymous act of kindness was a stitch, slowly mending the tattered fabric of her faith in humanity. She still had no idea who her benefactor was, but she would send a silent, grateful prayer to the mysterious friend every single night. Meanwhile, Liam continued his charade as the hospital janitor, his heart aching with a strange mix of joy and loneliness. He would catch glimpses of her during her prenatal appointments. Her face was less pale now, the hollows under her eyes slowly receding, replaced by a gentle, peaceful light. Seeing her safe was a balm to his own wounded soul, a purpose that pulled him from the heavy fog of his grief. He was healing himself by healing her. This quiet observation became a sacred ritual. Their inevitable reconnection happened a month later, back in the same hospital cafeteria. Liam, finishing his shift, saw her sitting by a window, a cup of herbal tea cupped in her hands, a soft, contented look on her face. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a beautiful, hopeful curve beneath her simple dress. He knew he couldn't stay in the shadows forever. Taking a deep breath, he walked over, his heart thudding in his chest. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I never properly thanked you." Elara looked up, and a slow smile of recognition spread across her face. It was a smile that lit up her entire being. "The janitor," she said warmly. "I'm glad to see you again. Please sit." He sat down, feeling clumsy and out of place without his janitor's cart as a shield. They talked for hours, the sterile silence of the cafeteria fading into a soft hush around them. She didn't ask about the money, and he didn't offer any information. They talked not as a benefactor and a recipient, but as two people who recognized the mark of grief in each other. It was a quiet, tender, unspoken understanding. He told her his name was Liam and that he was a single dad. He invented a story about losing his job in construction, a plausible lie that explained his current position. He spoke of his little girl, Lily, who he said was staying with her grandparents. The lie was a shard of glass in his throat, but it was necessary to maintain his disguise. He had to know it was him she was connecting with, not his wealth. Not Liam Blackstone, the CEO, but Liam, the quiet janitor with sad eyes. He learned her name was Elara. They began meeting regularly. Liam would find excuses to be in the cafeteria during her appointments, and their quiet conversations became the anchor of his week. One rainy afternoon, sitting in their usual spot, the mood grew more somber, more intimate. The pounding rain on the glass roof seemed to insulate them from the rest of the world. Elara, her gaze distant, began to speak about the accident, about the life she had lost. She spoke of Julian, not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. "The worst part wasn't the betrayal," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "It was the feeling of being erased, as if my worth was tied to my ability to walk, to be a perfect accessory in his perfect life." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She was unflinching. Liam listened with unwavering attention, his heart aching for her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. Instead, when she finished, he simply reached across the table and pushed a napkin dispenser closer to her. A small, practical gesture of care that felt more meaningful than any words could. He then made a decision. He had to give her a piece of his own truth. "I understand," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely showed. "I lost my wife a year ago. In this hospital." He told her about Sarah, about her laughter, about their dreams of a large family. He confessed the unbearable pain of her dying in childbirth, taking their baby daughter with her. The confession scene unfolded not with dramatic pronouncements, but in the sacred, quiet space between two shattered hearts. As he spoke, Elara's eyes filled with a deep, sincere empathy. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his forearm, a simple touch that conveyed more than words ever could. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she whispered. In that moment, they were no longer a janitor and a patient. They were two survivors, forging a profound bond over their shared grief. The foundation of something new, something deep and tender and real, was being laid. A fragile hope. The climax arrived with the subtlety of a lightning strike. It came in the form of an invitation to the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala, a high society event that was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. The invitation, addressed to her new apartment, was clearly a calculated act of cruelty from Julian and his mother, a summons to her own execution. They wanted to parade her ruin, to publicly solidify their narrative of her as a desperate, grasping liar. For days, Elara agonized over it. Part of her wanted to shrink away, to hide in the safe haven her anonymous benefactor had provided. But another part, a core of steel that had been forged in the fire of her suffering, refused to be cowed. She would go, not for a fight, but to stand before them, dignified and unbroken, to show them they had not erased her. Liam, hearing of her plan during one of their talks, felt a surge of cold dread. He knew the Sterlings. He knew their capacity for casual public cruelty. He tried to dissuade her, but seeing the quiet, unwavering resolve in her eyes, he knew he couldn't stop her. "Then you won't go alone," he said, his voice firm. He told her he would get a suit and accompany her, masquerading as a friend. She agreed, a grateful, trusting smile on her face, completely unaware that he wasn't just planning to attend. He was planning to end the war. The night of the gala, the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a glittering sea of jewels and champagne, a cavernous space filled with the city's elite. Alara, in a simple but elegant deep blue dress that accentuated her pregnancy, felt a tremor of fear as she wheeled herself in, Liam walking steadily by her side, his presence a quiet anchor. He was dressed in a simple, rented black suit, looking handsome but unremarkable, blending into the background as he intended. Whispers followed them like a trail of snakes. Heads turned. The air grew thick with judgment. It didn't take long for the antagonists to make their move. Julian, looking impeccable in a custom tuxedo, and his mother, a woman dripping in diamonds with a smile as cold and sharp as the stones themselves, approached them. The air crackled. Mrs. Sterling looked Alara up and down, her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. She didn't even acknowledge Liam. "Well, well," she sneered, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room. "I'm surprised you have the audacity to show your face here. Looking for a new benefactor, are we? Peddling your sad story and your condition." Julian smirked, a cruel, ugly twist of his lips. "Mother, be kind. She's clearly desperate. Tell me, Alara, whose child is it, really? You must have gotten busy after your little accident." The humiliation was public, brutal, and designed to shatter her. Alara's face went pale, but she held her head high, her dignity a fragile shield. She gasped, her chest tightening. She was overwhelmed. Then, everything changed. A man stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase, his movements calm and commanding. The simple, rented suit Liam had been wearing was gone. In its place was an exquisitely tailored dark gray suit that spoke of immense power and wealth. His posture shifted, the weary slump of the janitor replaced by the ramrod straight, confident stance of a commander. He was no longer Liam the janitor. He was Liam Blackstone, and the entire room seemed to suck in a collective breath as they recognized him. Total silence. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood protectively in front of Alara's wheelchair, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. He fixed his gaze on Julian and his mother, and his eyes were not hollow with grief, but blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "The child," Liam began, his voice quiet but echoing with an undeniable authority that cut through the cavernous ballroom, "is yours, Julian. A fact confirmed by a paternity test I took the liberty of arranging from a sample you so carelessly left on a glass at your club last month." He held up a sleek phone, displaying a legal document on the screen. Gasps splintered the silence. "You speak of benefactors," Liam continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft level. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Liam Blackstone, and for the past several months, I have had the profound honor of being Alara's benefactor." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Blackstone Enterprises was a global behemoth that could swallow the Sterling's company for breakfast. Mrs. Sterling's face went ashen. Julian froze, his smug expression crumbling into disbelief and terror. "This woman," Liam declared, his voice rising, "whom you cast aside like trash, is the purest, most selfless soul I have ever met. While you were counting your money, she was spending her last dollar to buy a hot meal for a janitor she'd never met. A janitor who was, in fact, me." He let that revelation hang in the air, a stunning reversal of power. He turned his gaze to Alara, his eyes softening with a raw, tender emotion. "I am taking full and permanent responsibility for Alara and for her child. She will never want for anything again. And as for Sterling Industries," he said, turning his icy glare back to Julian's father, who stood nearby, paralyzed with shock, "consider our pending merger negotiations terminated. My company does not do business with men who lack a soul." He had not just defended her. He had performed a public salvation, utterly demolishing her tormentors and elevating her in front of the very people who had scorned her. He had reversed everything. In the aftermath of the gala, Liam drove Alara not to her small, safe apartment, but to his stately mansion on the city's outskirts. It was a place of quiet elegance and polished marble, but the moment they entered the cavernous foyer, he led her past the ornate rooms to the one place that felt like a true home, the kitchen. It was warm and filled with the scent of wood smoke from a gentle fire crackling in a nearby hearth. The sterile silence of his grief-stricken life was gone, replaced by a soft hush of peace. Without a word, he set about making her a cup of chamomile tea, his movements steady and comforting. Alara watched him, her mind still reeling from the seismic revelations of the evening. The janitor, the kind man with the sad eyes, was one of the most powerful men in the country. The anonymous friend, her hidden savior, had been there all along, watching over her. Disbelief warred with a profound, blossoming hope in her heart. "Why?" she finally whispered, the single word holding all of her confusion and overwhelming gratitude. Liam brought the steaming mug of tea to the small table where she sat, his eyes meeting hers. They were no longer guarded, no longer hollow, but filled with an unwavering, tender light. He finally told her everything. He confessed the full depth of his grief, how her one small act of kindness in the cafeteria had been the flashlight that led him out of a dark, suffocating tunnel. "You saved me first, Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed me that goodness still existed. You gave me a reason to feel again. Protecting you, it became my purpose. It gave me my life back." He then made his grand declaration, a resolution not just to her problems, but to the yearning in his own heart. "I think I started falling in love with you that night in the cafeteria," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "And every day since, getting to know your strength, your quiet dignity, your pure heart, I have fallen deeper. Alara, I love you." Tears glistened in her eyes, tears of pure, cathartic joy. The despair she had carried for so long finally vanished, replaced by an undeniable sense of security and love. "I love you too, Liam," she replied, her voice steady and sincere. He knelt before her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. The gesture was not one of pity, but of worship. In that quiet, firelit kitchen, two broken souls, brought together by a selfless act and bonded by shared tragedy, found their complete and utter salvation in each other. They were whole. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the large bay window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, joyful sprites. The stately mansion was no longer a tomb of memories but a home, filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft gurgle of a baby. Alara, no longer confined to her wheelchair after a series of successful, cutting-edge surgeries funded by Liam, stood by the window, bouncing a beautiful, happy baby girl on her hip. The baby, named Lily Sarah in a tender tribute to the past, had Liam's commanding eyes and Alara's serene smile. Liam entered the room and wrapped his arms around both of them from behind, resting his chin on Alara's shoulder. The hollow grief that had once haunted his features was gone, replaced by a deep, unwavering contentment. He was no longer a hidden savior, but a present and loving husband and father. They were a family, their idyllic life a testament to the miraculous power of a single act of kindness. They had built a new world together, founded on love, healing, and the sacred promise of a shared future. Their happiness was complete. This story is a powerful reminder that the darkest night can be broken by the smallest flicker of light. It shows us that a single, selfless act of kindness, given without any thought of reward, can create ripples that change lives in the most profound and unexpected ways. Alara's quiet dignity in the face of unbearable hardship and Liam's journey from the depths of grief to the rediscovery of love is a testament to the resilience of the human heart. It teaches us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the capacity for empathy and the courage to reach out to another soul in pain. If this story touched your heart, and if you believe in the power of love and kindness to heal all wounds, please let us know. These tales are for those who see the world not just as it is, but as it could be, a place where goodness is always rewarded and where every suffering heart can find its savior. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Your support allows us to keep creating these heartwarming narratives. We'll see you in the next one.